So following days of violence and looting, some private citizens have formed armed vigilante groups to defend their communities. This is in light of the seeming failure of law enforcement authorities to prevent further looting and to prevent the destruction of property. But there are fears that vigilante action could lead to more deaths and give rise to tensions between communities. Let's unpack the story for you now. We're joined by spokesperson for the South African Self-Protection Alliance, Tim Hughes. Tim, it's great to have you with us on the program this morning on what is an incredibly important aspect of the story as it's unfolding, specifically in parts of Durban. In fact, Police Minister Bheki Cele telling us that already 15 people have died as a result of racial tensions in certain communities.
Thank you, Michelle. Good morning, and thank you for giving the opportunity to speak. Firstly, can we extend our condolences to those who've been victims of this violence, and we hope that the violence will be quelled by the security forces very, very soon. But as you suggest, the unrest and the extent of it and the destruction and the loss of life indicate a clear loss of control, or the inability, in particular, of the South African Police Service to retain and maintain law and order under these circumstances. And that gives rise to concerns from citizens and leads to these accusations, if you like, of vigilante groups. And that configuration of people as vigilante groups portrays them in a different light to those people we would regard as just protecting their life, liberty and property. And that's our particular concern.
Was it a big ask that the police were able to control the crowds of thousands of people who descended on malls to loot and to destroy property? Or was it the expectation that they should have gotten the situation under control without the army needing to be activated?
There was a failure of intelligence, Michelle, and that's become perfectly clear. I was in contact with a general days before this happened, raising concerns about an orchestrated effort to make KZN ungovernable. I didn't look at Gauteng. I sent an extensive note to this particular general. I received no response at all. We received concerns from citizens, commercial interests, community policing forums. We received this intelligence. We shared it with the security forces and received no report back at all. So there's some kind of failure there. We would like to think it is not collusion, although there are now there's now talk of collusion between intelligence services, disaffected people, Mkonto, Sizwe veterans, etc. But that intelligence was a clear failure, number one. Number two, what's become clear is the South African Police Service are ill-equipped to handle this type of situation.
Hold on for just a second, if you will, Tim, because I think the point that you've just made now is incredibly shocking. When did you receive this intelligence about efforts to destabilize KZN? And I think the next important question there is, which general were you in conversation with about this information?
We received information of the shutdown at least 48 hours before it commenced in earnest. We were looking at areas obviously around Nkandla, but seeing that spread to arterial networks, we shared that information. I to date have received no feedback whatsoever. It would be unseemly for me to share the name of the particular general, but I give you the assurance that a very comprehensive note was sent to this particular general on the basis of information we had received as private citizens. So there's either a failure here, a lack of ability to respond, or we're still potential collusion. In other words, a permissive approach to this, which has left the South African police exposed. Now, I think they're exposed in a number of ways. I think they're ill-equipped to handle this scale of problem. But it seems that they are not just led badly. There seems to be an absentee leadership within the SAPS, from the minister through to the commissioner, who've been at odds with one another, to command and control in KwaZulu-Natal and indeed Gauteng. And I suppose the final question is, to what extent their training provides them with the wherewithal to deal with these situations, right down to the use of appropriate equipment. In every visual you and I have seen in the early days of the rioting, it was difficult to spot a South African Police Service person on the ground tackling the issue. What we've seen recently is a stronger presence, but far too often the police tackling old women, gogos, females, vulnerable people, people who are limping, as opposed to tackling the problem in a determined, incisive and structured manner.
I mean, it sounds to me, Tim, that if you as a civil society organization is getting the kind of intelligence that you've just described 48 hours before those tensions really escalated, that surely our security and our intelligence organizations would also have gotten that information and, I mean, on the face of it, chose not to act.
These are questions I would call on Parliament as well. Where is Parliament in this? Parliament should be reconvened. We haven't seen this type of crisis in our country since, I would submit, the 90s and the 80s. It reminds one of 1976, but for very, very different reasons. And Parliament hasn't met. It's on recess. The President has made one statement. Becky clearly has appeared on television on a number of occasions, but speculating about the source and the aim of the violence, and the Deputy Minister of the State Security Agency of Intelligence. Where is Parliament in all of this? If there's going to be a state of emergency, Parliament has to be involved. Parliament should be holding the executive branch to account right now and calling for answers. They represent the citizenry. They represent the electorate. They should be asking these questions right now. You're asking them. We're asking them. Where is Parliament asking these important questions about our country's instability?
And as you say, as we've been tracking the story as journalists on the ground, it's often been the case where we've been on the scene of looting for hours on end with live rolling coverage with no sign of a single police officer. In fact, someone cheekily tweeted, you know, if police want to know where to go, they should watch Newzroom Afrika. What do you make of police's lack of a response? And it's not just in an incident that lasts maybe half an hour, but for hours on end.
Well, you raise an important point, and the one area of excellence, magnificence and bravery in all of this is the media. You at Channel 405 have done an excellent job, and my friends and colleagues have noted on the job that you've done. But other media outlets, you've been brave and you've brought the story to us, and you've brought information to us that others haven't. What you've exposed is that very point, is the extent, the scale, the organization that's gone behind this. If you look at the N3, if you look at the sort of, as it were, the chains of cars, vehicles, 4x4s that are being used, how the situation has morphed, you've exposed this. The real situation is the absence of the police in all of this. You know, only occasionally do you see a blue uniform, but you often see a blue uniform standing by, either watching it, observing it, or after the fact. This is a profound failure of the South African police, and we need to have a commission of inquiry into this as soon as possible, because the minister needs to take responsibility. The commissioner, the regional policing structures of KZN and Gauteng, and the intelligence services. It's time to get real about policing in South Africa and stop blaming private citizens, who the minister is now trying to prevent from owning or acquiring weapons for self-defense. This is exactly what the new bill is about, is to stop citizens owning weapons for self-protection. These riots demonstrate, unfortunately, the very need for that final line of self-defense.
I want to bring our discussion back to that very point as we round off our interview with you, Tim. I mean, surely that cannot be the answer. The answer to what's happening in the country cannot be ordinary citizens who don't have the necessary training taking to the streets heavily armed to try and bring their communities into a safe zone.
Michelle, if something good is going to come of this, we will be able to, if we treat it properly, in a structured and comprehensive way, identify the sources of this type of violence. Is it poverty? Is it relative deprivation? Is it politically stoked? Is it gangsterism? It's probably all of these things, but that's the area that we need to identify, from politics to sociology to economics. What we don't need to do is to take away the very final desperate line of defense from private citizens owning weapons under these circumstances. Until we root out the cause, number one, until we have a South African police service that is fit for purpose, you cannot legislate these issues out of account. And all you will do is to push weapons underground and make the problem far worse.
Tim Hughes, spokesperson for the South African Self-Protection Alliance. We appreciate your time this morning on the channel. Certainly a lot of worrying information coming out of that interview, not least of which that civil society organization, like the one he speaks for, had information about the unrest 48 hours before it unfolded. What does it say once again about our own country's intelligence capabilities?